June 23rd, 1565, Fort Saint Elmo, Malta. For 31 days, 600 men had held back an army of 40,000. Now, as Ottoman janissaries poured through the shattered walls, the last defenders of Saint Elmo knew their time had come. Every man fought to the death. Not one surrendered. Across the harbour, 70-year-old Grand Master Jean de la Valette watched his knights die. He had ordered them to hold that fort at all costs. They had bought him time he desperately needed, because if Malta fell, nothing would stop the Ottoman Empire from conquering Italy and beyond. This is the story of how one religious military order fought the most powerful empire on earth twice, and how their struggle would determine the fate of Europe. To understand Malta, we must first go back to Rhodes, December 1522. For 200 years, the Knights Hospitaller had ruled this island fortress, the last Christian stronghold in the eastern Mediterranean. From here, they raided Ottoman ships, disrupted Muslim trade, and remained a constant thorn in the Sultan's side. The new Ottoman Sultan, Suleiman, had just taken the throne. He was 26 years old, ambitious and determined to prove himself. Rhodes would be his first conquest. In July 1522, the largest invasion force the Mediterranean had ever seen appeared on the horizon. Over 100,000 Ottoman soldiers, 400 ships. Against them stood Grand Master Philippe Villiers de l'Isle Adam with 7,000 defenders. The mathematics were brutal, 15-to-1 odds. For 6 months, the Ottomans battered the walls of Rhodes. Their massive siege cannons fired day and night. The defenders held. Ottoman miners dug tunnels beneath the walls. The knights countermined, fighting brutal underground battles in pitch-black tunnels. Week after week, assault after assault was thrown back. But mathematics always wins. By December, half the knights were dead. Food was running out. The civilian population was starving. On December 20th, Grand Master Liesel Adam asked for terms. Suleiman granted them an honourable surrender. The knights could leave with their weapons, their religious relics, even their artillery. On New Year's Day, 1523, the survivors sailed away from Rhodes, watching their home of 2 centuries fade into the distance. They were crusaders without a crusade, warriors without a fortress, an order without a home. The question was, would they ever find one again? For 7 years, the Knights Hospitaller wandered the Mediterranean like ghosts. Then in 1530, Holy Roman Emperor Charles V made them an offer. He would give them the islands of Malta and Gozo. The price? 1 Maltese falcon per year. It seemed generous, but Malta was no Rhodes. The island was small, rocky, and poor. Its fortifications were modest at best. Still, it had one advantage, the Grand Harbour, one of the finest natural harbours in the Mediterranean. The knights accepted they had no other choice. Under Grand Master Liesel Adam and his successors, the transformation began. Fort Saint Angelo was strengthened. Fort St. Michael was built. Walls were raised. Ditches were dug. And most importantly, the knights resumed their old trade, raiding Ottoman shipping. In Constantinople, this did not go unnoticed. The decades that followed saw the Mediterranean descend into a naval war of unprecedented scale. Ottoman admirals like Hayreddin Barbarossa and Turgut Reis, known to Christians as Dragut, dominated the seas. In 1538, Barbarossa crushed a Holy League fleet at Preveza. In 1551, Dragut ravaged Gozo, enslaving thousands, and captured Tripoli. Then came 1560, the Battle of Jerba. A Christian coalition fleet of nearly 150 ships sailed to recapture Tripoli. Dragut was waiting. He destroyed them. Over 15,000 casualties. Dozens of ships sunk or captured. It was a catastrophe. The Mediterranean now belonged to the Ottomans, and Malta was next. By 1565, everyone knew the invasion was coming. The only question was when. Grand Master Jean Parisot de la Valette had become leader of the Knights in 1557. He was now 68 years old, a veteran of countless battles who had once spent a year as an Ottoman galley slave. He knew his enemy. He knew what was coming. La Valette prepared Malta for total war. Every building outside the fortifications was demolished to deny the enemy cover. Crops were harvested and stored inside the walls. Every knight was recalled home. Supply ships arrived from Sicily loaded with grain, gunpowder, and weapons. Then the knights did something audacious. They intensified their raids. In one particularly bold attack, they captured an Ottoman ship carrying the governors of Alexandria and Cairo. This was deliberate provocation. La Valette needed the Ottomans to attack now before they were fully prepared, and it worked. In Constantinople, 70-year-old Sultan Suleiman was furious. He had conquered Rhodes at the beginning of his reign. Now, at the end of it, he would finish what he started. The knights would be destroyed. Malta would fall. He assembled an army of 40,000 men, 6,000 elite janissaries, 9,000 Sipahi cavalry, thousands of North African troops and corsairs, nearly 200 ships. To command them, he appointed Mustafa Pasha, a veteran general, as overall land commander. Piali Pasha, a rising star who had married into the Sultan's family, would lead the fleet, and Dragut, the legendary corsair, would bring his own fleet and expertise. Against this armada, La Valette had 500 knights, 3,000 Maltese militia who barely tolerated their foreign overlords, and 1,000 Spanish and Italian soldiers sent by the Viceroy of Sicily, Don Garcia de Toledo. Don Garcia promised more reinforcements, but they were months away. Malta would have to hold alone, May 18th, 1565. The Ottoman fleet appeared off the southern coast. The Turks landed at Marsaxlok Bay and pushed inland. By May 21st, they had reached the Grand Harbour. Now came the critical decision: where to strike first. Mustafa Pasha wanted to capture the inland town of Medina, breaking Maltese morale. Piali Pasha insisted they must take Fort Saint Elmo first to secure the harbour for the fleet. Piali won the argument. This decision would change everything. Fort Saint Elmo sat on a rocky peninsula at the harbour entrance. It was small, isolated from the main defences, and garrisoned by only 600 men. Piali estimated it would fall in less than a week. By May 24th, Ottoman siege guns were in position. The bombardment began. Massive stone cannonballs weighing hundreds of pounds smashed into St. Elmo's walls. Hour after hour, day after day, the pounding continued. The defenders could only crouch behind shattered stone and wait for the assault they knew was coming. La Valette watched from Fort St. Angelo across the harbour. When St. Elmo's commander begged permission to abandon the position, the Grand Master refused. Every day St. Elmo held was another day for reinforcements to gather in Sicily, another day to strengthen the main defences. The men in St. Elmo understood they were being sacrificed, so they resolved to make their deaths count. On May 29th, Spanish soldiers sallied out at night and massacred Ottoman engineers in their trenches. The Janissaries rallied and drove them back, but precious time had been bought. On June 2nd, Dragut arrived with 1,500 more men. He positioned artillery to cut off St. Elmo from resupply. Still, the knights ran small boats across the harbour in darkness, bringing fresh men and ammunition. From June 10th to June 16th, the Ottomans launched 3 massive assaults. Each was thrown back with terrible losses on both sides. Contemporary sources report that even the Maltese militia fought with nearly the courage of the knights themselves. On June 17th, Dragut was mortally wounded while inspecting the trenches. The legendary corsair, scourge of the Mediterranean, would die 6 days later. By June 22nd, the Janissaries had built a bridge across the defensive ditch. The final assault was coming. On June 23rd, they attacked from all sides. The exhausted defenders, reduced to a few hundred men manning shattered walls, could not hold. The Ottomans poured through the breaches. Not one defender surrendered. They died fighting to the last man. Mustafa Pasha looked across the harbour at the much larger forts of Birgu and Senglea. If Saint Elmo had cost him this much, what price would he pay for those? The Ottomans had lost over 6,000 men, more than half their elite Janissaries. And the siege had taken not a week, but 31 days. It was a victory. But at what cost? Through July and August, the siege of Birgu and Senglea continued. Ottoman artillery hammered the walls. The knights held. On July 15th, the Ottomans launched a massive two-pronged assault by land and sea. But a Greek deserter had warned La Valette. The knights had built an underwater barrier of sharpened stakes. The amphibious assault turned into a massacre. The land attack was repelled. Malta still stood. By August, Ottoman morale was collapsing. Casualties were staggering. Disease was spreading. The summer heat was brutal. And without Dragut, the Ottoman command structure had fallen apart. Mustafa and Piali were constantly arguing. On August the 7th, Mustafa ordered one final desperate assault. 12,000 men attacked Birgu's walls under massive artillery bombardment. They breached the walls. They poured into the town. Street fighting erupted. For hours, it seemed, the harbour would finally fall. Then, fortune intervened. A small force of 100 Spanish and Maltese cavalry from Medina attacked the Ottoman camp, which had been left nearly unguarded. They slaughtered the sick, burned tents, destroyed supplies. When news reached the Ottoman troops in Birgu, panic spread. Believing a massive relief force had landed, they retreated from the walls they had fought so hard to breach. The day was saved by luck and the enemy's fear. The failed August 7th assault broke the Ottoman army. Morale collapsed. Supplies were running low. Mustafa and Piali could barely speak to each other. In Constantinople, Suleiman was sending furious letters demanding Malta's capture. But the will to fight was gone. When Mustafa attempted one last gambit, a march on Medina, the defenders fired their few remaining long-range guns. The Ottomans, believing the city was well supplied, retreated. In reality, Medina was desperately short of everything. It had been a magnificent bluff. On September 7th, salvation arrived. Don Garcia de Toledo landed at St. Paul's Bay with 8,000 fresh troops. For the Ottomans, this was the end. Mustafa ordered withdrawal to the ships. The retreat became a rout as discipline collapsed. Knights and Spanish soldiers pursued the fleeing Turks, turning the withdrawal into a slaughter. By September 13th, the Ottoman fleet had departed. Behind them lay between 10 and 30,000 dead, depending on sources. The defenders had lost 2,500 soldiers and a third of Malta's civilian population. But Malta still stood. Against impossible odds, the Knights Hospitaller had defeated the Ottoman Empire's main expeditionary force. The Great Siege of Malta sent shockwaves across 2 continents. For Christian Europe, it proved the Ottoman advance could be stopped. For the Ottomans, it was a humiliating defeat that shattered the aura of invincibility they had built over decades. Suleiman the Magnificent, who had begun his reign with the conquest of Rhodes in 1522, would die the following year, his dream of eliminating the Knights unfulfilled. The Knights Hospitaller would remain on Malta for another 233 years, a permanent reminder that even the greatest empires have limits. From Rhodes to Malta, the struggle had defined an era. And in that struggle, 600 men in a small fort had changed the course of history. But the Ottoman wars were far from over. 6 years after Malta, the navies of Christendom and Islam would clash again at Lepanto. in the largest naval battle the Mediterranean had ever seen. The struggle for Hungary would rage for decades more, and Vienna itself would face Ottoman siege not once, but twice. We're covering every major conflict of the Ottoman Wars, from their rise to their final collapse in 1923. If you want to see how this epic saga unfolds, subscribe and hit the bell icon so you don't miss a single battle. And let us know in the comments, what Ottoman battle should we cover next?